Hello, hello. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to get the evening underway. If I could just ask you to make your way to the courtyard, if that's okay, please. Compliments to the unit, well done. Carry on. Line out for the first 15. Oh, yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm Scott Heathwood, and I'm the MC for the evening. I'm going to say as little as possible because plenty of other people here have got plenty to say. I'd just like to start the evening, obviously, by welcoming Sir Peter and Lady Lynn Cosgrove, Dr. Brendan Nelson, and Gerard Henderson, who will be introducing Sir Peter later on. These events don't come together easily, I have to say, but my wife Louise has done a marvellous job at coordinating the moving parts, and ably helped by Brendan from London or wherever he is at certain times when we're having emails and meetings and whatever on international time. So I'd just like to thank those people in particular. I'd also like to thank Pat O'Shea from St Joseph's. He's brought his contingent to perform the Teddy Sheehan oration, which is marvellous. We haven't tried that before, so there's a few new things happening this year. You've got to bear with us. I'd definitely like to thank the Guard of Honour, which is performed by Waverley College cadets, and Julianne for participating in that. Julianne, thank you if you're not up here. Oh, there you are. There you are. There. So that's been fantastic and a great welcome for Sir Peter, so terrific. Now, the evening, as you would expect, needs to flow at a certain pace. I'm under strict instructions here, so we're going to move in. I'd like everyone to get a drink and then move inside, and we'll kick the evening off with the oration after our President John does the welcome, and I'm going to hand over to him in a tick, but following that we'll move inside and we'll start the oration, and then there'll be a break. Dr. Brendan will speak, and then there'll be a break, and we'll come back out, and then we'll go back in for Sir Peter. So that's the sort of the run of the evening. So I'd like to formally introduce John Robertson. He's our president of the Gallipoli Memorial Club, has been for quite a few years, and I'll hand over to you, John. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you for being the major organiser for tonight. This type of function has been Scott's brainchild, and we've had this sort of thing for 2 years, although I've been trying to track how long we've been commemorating the Battle of Lone Pine, and I've been unable to do that. That everybody I've spoken to says, oh, at least 25 years, at least 35, at least 35 years. So we don't know. So I welcome our special guest, General the Honourable Sir Peter Cosgrove, Knight of the Order of Australia, Companion of the Order of Australia Military, Commander of the Royal Victorian Order, Military Cross, and allegedly retired. And, of course, Lady Lynn Cosgrove. I have a number of apologies, which is a pity because a lot of them have been supporters of this night over many years. Her Excellency the Honourable Sam Moyston AC, Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia. Her Excellency the Honourable Margaret Beasley AC, KC, Governor of New South Wales. General the Honourable David Hurley AC, CVO DSC, retired, and Lynn Hurley. The Honourable Richard Miles, Deputy Prime Minister. Her Excellency Beijing Engineers, Consul General of the Republic of Turkey of Sydney. His Excellency James Munro, New Zealand Consul General. The Honourable David Harris MP. The Right Honourable Clover Moore AO, Lord Mayor of Sydney. Our patron, Major General Arthur Fiddick AO, retired. Major General Michael Smith AO, also allegedly retired, who will be attending the function at the Southport School. Club Director Greg Hanchard, also allegedly retired. Richard Roth, who has loaned us the copy of the Victoria Cross, carved from the lone pine outside of the War Memorial, and Anne Henderson. Welcome everyone to this, the 110th anniversary of the Battle of Lone Pine. Warami Budjuri Ngati, hello and good evening. This is Gadigal country, never ceded. This is the land of my ancestors. Their spirits walk among us. We don't own the land owns us. When we take our next step, remember the ones who have walked this sacred land before us. We believe that within the community there exists an obligation for all to preserve the special qualities of loyalty, respect, love of country, courage and comradeship, which were personified by the heroes of the Gallipoli campaign and bequeathed to all humanity as a foundation of perpetual peace and universal freedom. When we walk this country, we walk this journey of the Battle of Lone Pine tonight, remember our ancestors who walked the sacred land of the Gallipoli Peninsula and still walk among us. Didjuriga. So please take some time to have a look at the VC carved from the Lone Pine on display as and the explanation of the tree contained in the accompanying booklet. I'm sure Brendan will be able to fill you in about that. I'll now hand over back to Scott. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Would everyone just grab a drink, and we're going to move inside over the next 5 minutes, if that's okay. I've been assured by Sir Peter that I can be a little bit flexible, so we're going to move inside in about 5 minutes. Huh? And the boys are getting pizzas, so they're definitely coming. We can't forget about them, and they will be on time. So they can stand down, yes, absolutely. Okay, if everyone would take their seats, please. We'll get the more formal part of the evening moving along. I think nearly everyone's in, so they can come down the side door. I'd like to introduce you to Jackson Phillips. Jackson, and I'm not going to steal anyone's thunder, so Jackson is a St Joseph's old boy. He's written a play about the awarding of the VC for Teddy Sheehan, and largely to the efforts, thanks to the efforts of Brendan Nelson. And Brendan will talk about that, obviously, when the oration's been performed. So it's incredible that a young man like Jackson can feel that passion to write a 90-minute play about something that's reasonably obscure in the sense that it's not in the mainstream conscious of your average Australian. And it'd be nice if there were more Jacksons around that actually took these things seriously and embraced the creed of the Gallipoli club itself and also more generally in life. So Jackson, I'd like you to come up and you'll introduce the next part, and then I'll come back and I'll introduce Brendan, and then we'll have a break. So Jackson Phillips.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jackson Phillips. I am a Sydney-based writer, and I am incredibly honoured to be with you all here tonight. Who here has heard the name Teddy Sheehan? Ordinary seaman Edward Teddy Sheehan grew up in a little town called Latrobe in Tasmania. He was the youngest of 14 children. His father was James Sheehan, his mother was Mary. During World War II, once he was old enough, he enlisted into the Navy. In early December 1942, Teddy found himself on the HMAS Armidale as the gunner of the aft Oilerkin. And during an operation just north of Darwin, as his ship was being shot down by Japanese enemy aircraft, and whilst he was already wounded, Teddy strapped himself into a gun and fired back until he went down with the ship. For this, he received a mention in dispatches. This was the tale of Teddy Sheehan for the better part of a century. This was the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. It wasn't until 2011, when a little board called the Defence Honours and Awards Appeals Tribunal was established, that Teddy's story would begin its long, 10-year journey towards finally being rewritten. For you see, for the better part of a century, the tale of Teddy Sheehan, that tale I just told you, was fundamentally incorrect and incomplete. The bravery and valour Teddy had actually shown on that fateful day on the 1st of December 1942 had been buried and forgotten, and thus his gallantry was never properly honoured. However, thanks to the constant fighting from family and supporters based down in Tasmania, who would not let this injustice rest, Teddy's case would be reviewed numerous times over the course of that long 10-year journey. And eventually, in the winter of 2020, Teddy's case would find its way in front of one of our very own guests of honor here tonight, Dr. Brendan Nelson. Called upon by the Prime Minister at the time to chair a panel consisting of 3 other men, Dr. Peter Sheargold, Mr. David Bennett QC, and Mr. Brad Monera, these men were tasked with reviewing whether compelling new evidence existed proving that Ordinary Seaman Teddy Sheehan should receive a Victoria Cross for Australia, an award only held by 100 personnel at the time. And, as they would slowly come to learn, this would be no mean feat. 2 previous inquiries into Teddy's case had already taken place over the previous 9 years, and both times nothing compelling enough was found, and thus no retrospective awards were given. So, why had they been called upon by the Prime Minister to review this case if it had already been determined that he did not deserve any retrospective awards? If he truly did deserve a higher honour like the Victoria Cross, why was he never awarded that award in the first place, back in 1942? And why on earth were they even looking into a case about an 18-year-old kid who died almost 80 years ago at all? Our men quickly realised if they were going to find any answers, and if Teddy was going to have any luck at getting a genuine shot at the VC, pigs would have to fly. But on August 10th, 2020, after reviewing everything Brendan and his men had found after their 6 weeks of investigating, the Prime Minister finally recommended Ordinary Seaman Teddy Sheehan for the Victoria Cross for Australia. My new original stage play, currently in development, titled 101st, tells the story of how these men pulled off the impossible. We hope in the coming months and years to bring this story to life, a story of perseverance, justice, and redemption. This is a story that needs to be told. Teddy Sheehan deserved the Victoria Cross. Now, Australia deserves the truth behind why he never received one in the first place. However, before you all eventually one day get to know Brendan, Peter, David, and Brad, I would like you all now to meet Teddy Sheehan, an 18-year-old kid riding home to his mother just days before he'd be laid to rest at the bottom of the Timor Sea.
Dear Mum, just a few lines in answer to your ever welcome letter, which I received yesterday and was pleased to hear from you. Well, Mum, I can't say when I'll be back home, but I think it'll be January sometime. We haven't been given much information on how long this will take, but the boys and I are thinking no more than a week. I'm glad you settled down over there in the countryside, back home in Tasmania. There's not much to do over here on our ship, and I'll be glad when I get out of it. The sun is hot and scorching, the breeze is heavy and humid, and the food is grim and sickening. And I've discovered a new level of boredom being out at sea. Don't worry though, Mum. If they don't soon get rid of me, they won't have the pleasure of doing it. One of my new friends, Victor Leonard, though we all call him Ray, told me our mission might be getting cut short. So I don't think you need to be frightened of any of us not coming back, Mum. I don't think I'll ever even get to see where we're going in the end. It's a shame. I was excited to see another country. Though, perhaps this means I'll be back home for Christmas now. If so, save me some lamb, please, Mum. And save some for Ray as well. I offered him a plate. He and I are the youngest on our ship, so we're sticking together. I think you'll like him, Mum. Hopefully one day you'll meet him. I suppose Dad is still in good health and in good work. I promised I'll work for him once I get back home. Please assure him that I've not forgotten this promise. I suppose you'll be disappointed with Kath. She's only bringing one of her children to Christmas this year. I know how being a grandmother brings you brings you joy, hopefully I'll be able to provide you with a grandchild of my own one day. Auntie Nell and family, I'm sure, are all still as big as grumblers. Please say hello to them for me. As for Mick, unfortunately, I don't think I'll be able to get up to Latrobe to see him before he goes off on his own journey with the army. Please give him my love if I miss my opportunity to say goodbye to him. And ensure him I'll be waiting for him back at home when he returns. Well, Mum, I must say cheerio and best of wishes for the present. I miss you greatly and hope to see you soon. For now, I'll continue to work hard and do my best, just like you always taught me to. You need not worry about me, Mum. I'll be home before you know it. From your loving son, Ted.
Thank you, Ollie. What a marvellous performance. I'd now like to ask, and I'd also like to say that Coogee Prep still producing quality kids like that. Isn't it unbelievable after 120 years? I'd like to introduce Brendan Nelson to respond.
Well, thank you very much, Scott, and Jackson. What a fine young Australian. And you, Ollie, thank you for bringing Teddy Sheehan and his letter to life. Just to correct something that you said, Scott, Teddy Sheehan wasn't awarded a Victoria Cross because of me. He was awarded a Victoria Cross because of him and what he did. And it was a privilege to play a small role in addressing what was a series of injustices and sliding door moments over 80 years. And it was 2020, and we were in lockdown at the time, and I was the chairman and country president of Boeing Australia New Zealand, and I was actually up on the roof painting the chimney, and my mobile phone rang, so of course I didn't answer it because of where I was. And when I was back on the ground, I returned the call, and it was an unknown caller to me, and I said, "It's Brendan Nelson here, someone tried to call me." And he said, "Yeah, it's Scott." I said, "Scott who?" And he said, "Scott Morrison." I said, "Oh, sorry, mate." And so he went on and said, "I notice that you haven't said anything about the Teddy Sheehan controversy." And I said, "Well, I don't contribute to anything publicly unless I think it's going to be constructive, and I can't see that I could contribute anything in relation to this debate about Sheehan receiving a VC." And I said, generally speaking, I'm opposed to retrospectivity. Every one of the then 100 Victoria Cross recipients is worthy of having received it, but there are many others who are worthy of receiving it who did not. And he said to me, "Look, I would like you to take on a review of the two reviews that had been done, the second in 2019 from the Defence Honours and Wards Committee, which had recommended the Victoria Cross but had been then rejected by the government. And this was not well received, particularly in Tasmania and amongst generally the naval community. So I said, look, I'll do it under one condition, and that is I'm not paid for it, and I can work with the people that I think can contribute to this. So you heard of the three, Brad Manera, David Bennett, SC, the former Solicitor General, and Peter Shergold, one of the finest minds and people you'd ever work with, former Principal Secretary of Prime Minister and Cabinet. And it was interesting, on the first day of the meeting, the first day that we met, I said to them, there's a reason this keeps coming back. And it's not then Veterans Affairs Minister Guy Barnett in Tasmania, it's not the Sheehan family. There's something in this story, and we need to find out what it is. And David Sullivan, who had chaired the 2019 review, he said to me, I reviewed 14 of these cases for a retrospective Victoria Cross. He said, I rejected 13, except this one. At that first meeting, I asked the question, two questions actually. Has the wreck ever been surveyed? I was interested to know and subsequently was told that it hadn't. The second question, were there any Japanese records? And it was through the Australian War Memorial Chief Historian that we got access to the National Institute of Defence Studies in Tokyo and discovered, to our surprise and certainly my admiration, that the Japanese were just like the Germans in this sense, highly detailed records of everything they did militarily in the Second World War. Perhaps I should say not everything, but things that they did operationally, if you know what I mean. And what had happened was there were two pieces of new evidence that was available, in my opinion, to the second inquiry in 2019. The first was that Grant Sheehan related a story from 1992 where Ted Pellet, who'd been on the port side of Armidale with Sheehan, had said that Sheehan was not wounded when he left the side of the ship, when he could have easily got in the motorboat and got away. He was not wounded when he turned back to go back to the rear of the ship and to the Oerlikon gun. The second piece of evidence was the testimony of the then Chief of Navy, who had said, and I quote, that Sheehan's actions were amongst the most conspicuous bravery in the history of the Royal Australian Navy. But in terms of us going through it, and I know you're here to listen to Sir Peter, not to listen to me, but in terms of going through it, as I said, sliding door moments. Please never forget, Jackson, Ollie, and the students listening to this, Teddy Sheehan was one of 100 Australians killed that day. The crew's complement was 149. 49 survived the sinking, 100 did not. Teddy Sheehan was one of them. The record of proceedings by Lieutenant Commander David Richards was incomplete when it was delivered 6 days later. Not all of the survivors of the sinking, in other words, the witnesses, were actually back. His record of proceedings was incorrect. That's not his fault. The poor man had just been through commanding his ship. It had been bombed and sunk. He lost 100 of his men. But he said that Sheehan had remained at his post. Well, in fact, Sheehan's post was not the gunner of the Oerlikon. He was the loader. And he had not remained at his post. He'd actually left the post when the order to abandon ship had been given. He went to the listing port side, was with Ted Pellet when he cut one of the ropes holding the motorboat, and he saw the men being strafed in the water by the Japanese, and unwounded went back to his Oerlikon, strapped himself in, and as we know, began firing. The Japanese records, as I said, were meticulous. 5 operations of B-4 Betty Mitsubishi bombers, 9 of them left Kapang in the 3rd operation of the day from the 753rd Naval Group, and then there were 3 Japanese Mitsubishi Zeros from the 202nd Japanese Naval Group who left in the 3rd operation from Kapang. At 15:05, 5 minutes past 3 in the afternoon, they saw Armidale, recorded it, and they attacked the ship at 15:42. 6 minutes from the first torpedo hitting the starboard side, the ship sank. And in those 6 minutes, as we know, Sheehan left, went to the side of the ship, could see what was happening, and unwounded went back to the Oerlikon. The Japanese records also tell us that the bombers and the fighters fired 20 rounds of 20mm armour kind of munitions. So Peter would know what this is all about, but this stuff is only good for firing at big things like ships. But they fired 500 rounds of 7.7mm machine gun ammunition, which is only good for one thing, and that's killing people. The evidence being consistent with wave-top strafing of men in the water. To the young people that are listening to this, I understand at the schools, you hear this and you wonder, well, what does it mean? This young man was 18. He was just 1, 2, 3 years older than you. He was born in 1924. He was a part of a generation of Australians that was born in the aftermath of the war that was, the First World War. When he was a boy, he grew up through the Great Depression, privations beyond the comprehension of certainly my generation and that of my own children. They grew up under the shadows of the war they knew was coming. And then he was one of those great young Australians who mobilised, one of a million who mobilised to defend our vital interests. The Second World War was not about Australia's place in the world. It was about defending our vital interests. And then those who survived the war went about the economic and social reconstruction that made us who we are and gave us what we have. When you sing the national anthem, please think about what you are singing. Australians, all let us rejoice, for we are one and free. And we are free because of that generation and generations of Australians who've chosen to join the Royal Australian Navy, the Australian Army and the Royal Australian Air Force to ensure that we live in a country where we enjoy economic and political and religious freedoms, where you can go to a school where you can be taught your faith, in this case a Christian faith, but also be taught science, to live in a country where we can have the freedom to say what we believe, to have a press that can stimulate us to think and challenge us in terms of what we're thinking, and an independent judiciary that's independent from our political class. That is what has been achieved. And finally, there's something else that's really important in this. So if you're sitting in the school grounds and thinking, why am I here? There's something else that's really important. When we do this with Teddy Sheehan, what Sir Peter is about to do with the Battle of Lone Pine isn't just about remembering and understanding history and individual sacrifices. It's also us as a people elevating people that manifest qualities of being selfless, caring and brave, which is what Teddy Sheehan did on the 1st of December 1942, and it's what that 28-year-old Australian nurse Kirsty Bowden did on the 3rd of June 2017 on the London Bridge, when everybody else was running away from the panic melee as 3 terrorists were trying to kill as many people as they could. She ran into it. And her concern was not for herself, her own safety or her welfare, same as Teddy Sheehan. Her concern was the welfare and safety of others. And she was one of 8 killed that day, fatally stabbed through the chest. And her parents, 2 days later, described her as selfless, caring and brave. This all contributes to a societal milieu that stimulates and encourages and inspires people amongst us to manifest extraordinary qualities in circumstances that we hope we never see and are hard to anticipate. So thank you very much, Scott, and again to you, Jackson and Ollie, thank you.
Thank you, Brendan. Great speech, and I think a very moving subject. I hope all of you take something away tonight about that story and the message that Brendan has given us. Now, we're just going to have a little break, just quickly. People can charge their glasses. They're going to just pass around a bit more food, and we're coming back to introduce Sir Peter as the keynote speaker of the evening. So, Jackson, Ollie, wherever he is, he's probably not allowed in here, and even though he's a good Coogee prep boy, and Brendan, thank you very much. It was brilliant. Where's Pat? I think I'd just like to give Pat a little round of applause because he is the head of performing arts at St Joseph's, and he's done a wonderful job in bringing that side of it together tonight for us. So it's just a slight variation on the theme from last year, but I think it's been a good one. So thank you all, and we'll be back shortly. If I could just get everyone's attention, please, if you wouldn't mind taking your seats now, we'll move on.
We sit down?
Yeah. Okay. Ready? No. They're too hard to come by. All right, would everyone take their seats, please? We're nearly on time. I've done a great job, I reckon. Nothing like a bit of military stress. I hope everyone got a drink and had some more canopies. Okay, so we're going to move into the keynote speaker tonight, which is Sir Peter. Everyone knows that. I'm going to make a slight variation to the agenda, and that is that at the conclusion of Sir Peter's speech and to wrap the evening up, rather than having another break, we will ask Adriana to come up and just talk to us about the Gallipoli, briefly talk to us about the Gallipoli Scholarship Fund. Very important legacy that we want to develop with the Scholarship Fund. In fact, Mike Smith, who's the chairman of the Gallipoli Scholarship Fund, will be at TSS on Friday attending the unveiling of the horse, which is amazing. They spent $250,000 building a life-size bronze light horse. They have an incredible history, like a lot of other schools, but they lost 47 students in Gallipoli. 47. It's just sort of, it's unthinkable. So they're just so happy to be part of this movement that we, as the Gallipoli Club, want to build, and the Scholarship Fund is going to be hopefully part of that legacy and the next chapter. And I'm just talking to Omar. I haven't met him before. He's a funny bloke, Omar. I mean, he managed to give me his entire family history and wearing the Turkish uniform and standing on Gallipoli. And he said I'm an Aussie, though, by the way. So I'd like now just to ask Dr. Gerard Henderson to introduce Sir Peter. Gerard and I go back about 40 years, which is a long time, Gerard. I think, you know, I'm doing better than you. That's what I reckon. So without any further ado, Gerard Henderson, who runs the Sydney Institute, is going to introduce the keynote speaker, Sir Peter.
Thanks for coming along tonight, folks. If Scott's right, this could be my last talk here. or anywhere, or anywhere. In fact, I'm ringing. My phone's down there, but I'm going to put in a call to the undertaker. I want to get a good rate, you know. Times are tough. Well, the Sydney Institute's always had a good relationship with the Gallipoli Club, and I hope it will continue when I'm past it, or when I'm past. I'm sure it'll continue. So it's good to see Scott here tonight. Thanks for your kind comments, Scott. Much appreciated. Louise Heathwood said to me when I met her at the Gallipoli Club some years ago, she said, how do you respond to Scott? And I said, well, I just say yes. So that's why I'm here. But perhaps not next year, because I may not be here. So it's good to see the Southport School is on this broadcast today, and St Joseph's Hunters Hill is represented. And so it's the Anglicans in the north of Australia, the Catholics in the middle, and the late Teddy Sheehan VC in the south, who of course attended St Patrick's School in the Latrobe city or town of Latrobe on Tasmania's north coast. I want to say briefly something about the First World War. I've consistently maintained that Australia's involvement in the hostilities of 1418 was a just war, and not, as some left-wing historians say, an example of Australia fighting other people's war. Imperial Germany, the Kaiser's Imperial Germany invaded Belgium and France. Germany was a Pacific power. The Ottoman Empire was an ally of Imperial Germany. And I just have a personal view here because my uncle, Alan Dargaville, who was basically a private, died in the Third Battle of Ypres in Belgium in November 1917, on the same day as the Bolshevik Revolution, as it turned out, which had a devastating impact on my mother's family. Now, it's good to see Brendan Nelson here today. He's one of two, a little bit of political history here, he's one of two former Liberal Party leaders entitled to be called Doctor. So, good to know Doctor. Now, the other Dr. John Hewson is the other one's Dr. John Hewson. And all I can say is just give a bit of advice, and I might need it myself, that if anyone, that if there's any kind of medical emergency here tonight, you might as well go with your man Nelson, because doctorates in economics aren't much help in such situations. Now, always anxious to be helpful, Dr. Nelson gave a psychological assessment of Mr. Turnbull soon after he was replaced as Liberal Party leader in September 2008. Dr. Nelson told the Sydney Morning Herald's Peter Harcher that he diagnosed his predecessor as having the condition of narcissistic personality disorder. Who would have thought that? But generous to a fault, Dr. Nelson did not even bulk bill Medicare for his assessment. If there were more like that, the deficit would be lower. Now for the formalities. So Peter Cosgrove served as the 26th Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia. He was widely known for his earlier career in the Australian Defence Force, retiring as Chief of the Australian Defence Force, the ADF, in 2005. And of course, he commanded the international force in East Timor. In retirement, he's been actively involved with Defence Health and other charitable organisations. And now for something less formal. So Peter and Lady Lynn, who married in 1976, were a terrific double act at Government House in Canberra, at Admiralty House in Sydney, and in their travels within and outside Australia. And putting my historian's hat on, I would cite the Cosgrove Governor-Generalship as one of the most successful in Australian history. Now, born into an army family, Sir Peter attended Waverley College in Sydney and later graduated from the Royal Military College Duntroon in 1968. He was deployed in Malaysia and later Vietnam, where he commanded an infantry battalion and was awarded the Military Cross. He's the author of two important books, My Story in 2006 and You Shouldn't Have Joined, a memoir in 2020. He delivered the Sydney Institute annual lecture in 2000 and spoke at the Institute again 3 years later. Due to COVID, we couldn't do a public talk on the occasion of the launch of You Shouldn't Have Joined. Spoiler alert, the full saying is, I think you shouldn't have joined the Australian Army if you can't take a joke. so he joined it. And I interviewed Sir Peter at our office about his book in November 2020 because we couldn't do a public event. But it was filmed and it was published. And I'd recommend to students and others who are following this talk today to watch the interview on the Sydney YouTube channel. It was a great performance by the former Governor-General. Sir Peter discussed growing up in a working class family with a father in the army in Sydney's Paddington. This was before what Paul Keating once called the basket weavers moved into the inner city. Very much a working class suburb in those days. And the interview we did together showed a serious side, as one would expect from a former senior figure in the Australian Army and a Governor-General, but also a degree of irreverence, which he managed to hide mainly in senior positions in the Australian Defence Force at Government House. But it's quite an irreverent talk and well worth watching. So I very much look forward to hearing the speech tonight. Go for it.
I'm delighted to be here, and those bells keep ringing. Maybe we're under attack. I just saw the light coming in through the Mint gates and remembered back to 2001, when this was one of the places of marking of the 100 years of federated life in Australia. Everybody turned up here, had ceremonies during the day, and the day finished with a march down Sydney streets, which included Macquarie Street. And to view that, the invited guests, such as Lynn and I was then the Chief of the Army, we're up on the balcony of the main building of the Mint, looking out over Macquarie Street. And it was a wonderful parade. The weather was kind. It was late in the afternoon, so it was starting to get a little bit towards twilight. And at the end of this very long parade came a huge group of younger Australians. They weren't part of an organised group, but they were in their street clothes, their weekend clothes, if you like, and they were not marshalled in any way. They were strolling along, but a great big group of them. And about the only uniform thing about it was they were chanting something. And all of us up on the balcony were intrigued by this. And as they came along, we started to be able to discern what it was they were saying. And as they were going along, there were the bystanders out on the footpath, there were lots and lots of them, and these kids were pointing as they chanted to all these people. And I found out what they were chanting, and Lynn and I were thrilled. I mean, the hair stood up, such hair as I had on the back of my head. And they were chanting, "We love you because you're Australian." I thought, what a way to finish the day. That was wonderful. Now, the Lone Pine Address. My thanks to you, Gerard, for your very generous remarks. You've kindly been my host, as you noted, on several times at the Sydney Institute, and on those occasions you've been equally generous in your remarks on those occasions. I'm grateful to John Robertson. Where are you? You're down there in the body of the Kirk. It's not you on the bills. The president of the Gallipoli Memorial Club, for the invitation that you are responsible for to deliver this address this evening, and to Scott and Louise for their behind-the-scenes work to make this happen. I now know it's an established function, but I know that every year it's a labour of love, and I think all of your colleagues and your guests are very grateful. So may we now salute them? Of course, I follow in the footsteps of your inaugural orator, Dr. Brendan Nelson. Following in Brendan's footsteps is often quite perilous for any speech maker. Over the years, I've been an avid recipient of his oratory on many occasions. And to follow him can be alike to when a publican stands up in a pub and makes a public announcement that the beer is off. you feel inadequate and unpopular. Still, so much of the story of Lone Pine is about courage, so I guess I'll just press on. Let me digress from the main theme for a few moments in following up on the theme of courage to say how welcome and appropriate it was to have the earlier references to the matter of Ordinary Seaman Teddy Sheehan, VC. This was a story of many decades of unrequited recognition of enormous gallantry by an everyday Australian who was in every way a selfless hero. Thank you. Industrialised war. We've coined the term as a global community of industrialised war. This refers to when advances in industrial means and science changed our ways and means of killing each other, both on land and sea, and then, in its time, remarkably, in the air. And this has revolutionised warfare. Of course, it's been further revolutionised in today's age, but we'll just talk back to those days. Signs of it emerged in the second half of the 19th century, but it superimposed itself on the world in the Great War. Warships chased each other around at high speed and over vast oceans, exchanging huge shells at distant horizons. Troop convoys could travel halfway around the world in weeks rather than months. Military balloons and soon fixed-wing aircraft were commonly seen on battlefields and soon enough over seascapes. Cavalry became old-fashioned oddities. Machine guns and massed artillery, barbed wire and trenches saw to that. As one might expect, military science, indeed military experience, was concentrated in the various powers of the old and new world and were generally not part of the considerations or capabilities of the outliers of empires, colonies and newly independent entities such as Australia. Now, translate that to the new Commonwealth. It was reasonable and indeed inevitable that the new Commonwealth of Australia was in that latter basket. We had vestigial military forces, basically the leavings of colonial militia, cadets, and only small naval forces well short of open ocean capabilities. What we had, however, was a somewhat naive but instinctively energetic sense of obligation and expectation that we would do our bit if the mother country called for help. So indeed, when the guns of August brought war in 1914, the cry went out, Australia will be there. Now stop glancing at your watches because I know you're thinking we're 6 minutes in and we haven't got out of Australia yet. Fear not. As Governor-General, I had the good fortune to go to Albany in 2014 for the 100th anniversary of the sailing from Australian waters of that first major troop convoy. You know the one. It was heading off to Europe, wasn't it? But it was instead diverted to the Middle East when it was plain that Churchill's notion of forcing the Dardanelles by an Allied fleet to knock Turkey out of the war had failed. As a result, the next course of action to capture the Gallipoli Peninsula was conceived of and put into train. So back in 2014, it was a poignant moment to stand in Albany and contemplate the nature of that group and perhaps some of the thoughts running through their minds. They staged a street march. People, if you like, emulating those diggers in their new uniforms and their new slouch hats, marching down the main street to the embarkation point after a quick break in Albany. There's no doubt among those thousands of Australians and New Zealanders back in 1914 who were part of that convoy, there must have been quite a number who'd had a Guernsey, so to speak, in earlier conflicts. The Sudan, the two Boer Wars, and if they were ex-British Army, maybe a few other conflicts as well. But the vast majority of them, diggers, junior non-commissioned officers and junior officers, would have been ingenues, off to see the elephant, off to kick the Hun out of poor little Belgium, home within a few short months. It is sadly whimsical to contemplate how many of the junior ranks of the fighting troops in that convoy came home unscathed in body and mind when the guns fell silent in 1918. It seems to me, when the vast majority of the convoy was diverted to the Middle East, that by and large, apart from confusion for a few days, those debutants in warfare would have said, oh well, instead of the Hun, we'll take on Johnny Turk. Let's set aside all the training and the planning in the lead up to the landings on the Gallipoli Peninsula to turn to the events on and after 25th of April 1914. Now, may I pause here to pay scant attention on the beach and then on the lower slopes to the deafening cacophony of small arms fire and artillery, the naval explosions. Now, I had the good fortune to make numerous visits to Gallipoli. At this stage, may I invite people in the audience today who've been to Gallipoli at any stage to just give me a wave. I thought it would be something like this. Thank you. And I know amongst you, those who haven't been would probably say, but I will go. It's almost a place of pilgrimage for younger Australians. For on time now, and I think well into the future, it becomes a place to say, I've been there. I've breathed the air. I've looked at the scrub. I've walked the ridges. I've got that dirt on my boots. I've visited cemeteries. I've stood at the base of graves. I've read the names. I've felt the emotion. I'll pause here to say that on my 2005 visit to Gallipoli, when I was the Chief of the Defence Force, that was the 90th anniversary, and I knew I was retiring a little later in that year. And I'd already given my military spot, so to speak, to another officer a couple of years beforehand on the understanding that I reckon I was going to be CDF, and he said he knew I was going to be CDF and he was about to retire. So, can I have your spot? So I went as CDF for the 90th, and John Howard went as well. And it was somewhere between effervescence and almost a religious observance while we were there. And I can recall being at the dawn service, very, very cold. And the silly CDF was in his service dress, not adequate. Everybody else had overcoats and beanies, and not me. Prince Charles, now the King, was there, and others. But the real moment came at Lone Pine. That morning service is for all of the Allied nations, plus Turkish representatives, of course, always. And it was appropriately solemn. One of Australia's wonderful ships had come from wherever and was standing off the coast to, if you like, emulate the presence of the Allied force. The Turkish rule was that the vessel should approach no closer than 2 kilometres offshore. And that's the shortest 2 kilometres I've ever seen. You could basically see the grins on the ratings on the deck. But then in the later morning, 10 o'clock, there's that service at Lone Pine. Normally, it's warmed up a little. Still crisp, but it's warmed up. The crowd, a giant crowd, leaves the dawn service area and wanders up the winding pathway and establishes itself at the Lone Pine War Memorial. And for those who've been, I suppose everybody who had their hand up made part of their visit to the Lone Pine Memorial. Yep. So John Howard, myself and our ladies were down somewhere close by at a little pub that is on the Gallipoli Peninsula for tourists like us, you see. And we were hiding out there to make a timed entrance to the memorial. And John sent a person to me to say, the Prime Minister's going to sneak away up to the Lone Pine Cemetery early. Do you want to come? Just you and he, and the ladies will come up at the due time. Yes, I say. We went up there and we entered the, it was like the competitors in the sort of Australian Open tennis had entered the Rod Laver Arena, the cheering, because they saw their Prime Minister. And you'll all remember how popular John was. And myself and I was well known, and I was in uniform, so I was immediately recognisable. And we decided we'd go separate ways there so we could maximise our outreach to the crowd. And it was exuberant. It was almost irreverent, but it was very Australian. It was like, there was a buzz in the crowd. And you think, well, isn't that irreverent? Isn't that in some way a little bit light-hearted for the dignity of the moment? And I'll say no, because the moment it became formal, they snapped to. And, you know, there were complaints in the media back in Australia that the crowd was of such a nature, so huge, that sitting in the tennis stadium type seating, sloped seating, there wasn't nearly enough room, so people crowded onto the graves themselves. And this became, briefly, a contentious moment in the media. Oh, disrespect, you know, standing on gravestone. And I got asked for a comment, and I thought, I'm going to have to kill this somehow. So I said, well, I think every soldier lying in those graves would have said, welcome, you can stand on my grave. I'm just glad you're here. But the nature of the gathering was such that people appreciated that if there was any part of the wider world where there is a sense of not ownership, but stewardship of a patch of dirt, it would be that cemetery on that peninsula from that 90 years ago then, and as we're up to now, many more years than that. And long may it maintain. Okay. Now, I'm just going to get back on track here. What happened, of course, we had carnage on the beach. We had people getting off boats that had already been shattered by either shell fire, shrapnel over the water, or machine gun fire. So boats arrived full of dead people. We had people stumbling off into fire. We had people attempting to find their cobbers and start the defence, the advance up the hill. Of course, they were in the wrong spot. We had all of this occurring, and we had carnage. People, in trying to describe the nature of the Australian Army troops that went ashore at Anzac Cove and nearby, their nature. And I'm not going to talk about the tactics today, I'm going to talk about the human element. And they were described as gladiators with the eyes of children. The form, the energy, the commitment, the courage of a gladiator. Those innocent eyes. Young men, diggers, junior NCOs, junior officers, even some of the seniors, even your Monashers going ashore had no idea what they were getting into. So in all of that, those first days established that this was industrialised war fought in a place which was almost a jungle and a terrible piece of terrain. My impression standing there as Chief of the Defence Force on that shore, looking up, my first view, personally, I'd seen movies and I'd seen pictures and I'd heard accounts, but you have to stand there, and I was a military professional, I looked up and said experienced soldiers would jack up at the poor planning, the fact that they were in the wrong place, and they were asked to charge up a hill. And it was only the fact that these innocents said, well, this is what you do, you go. And it was a terrible day in the sense of the casualties there. I'm told, I'm not sure of the veracity of this, that a Victorian battalion could not be located. It was supposed to be in place XYZ, and the generals weren't getting information. Where is it? And the answer was it had basically been wiped out on landing, and it was not effective. Now, when we get into the campaign, we're now into very late July, early August, and it's been stabilised. Stabilised sounds like it's a very efficient word. Basically, we'd reached almost what we call the culminating point. Couldn't go another step. So how to break the nexus? Conceived of a massive attack by Australia's 1st Brigade on a very narrow front at a particular point where it was thought that a short assault, that is short in distance, would yield results. A massive attack preceded by bombardment and with all kinds of other additions made to the attack. And this was executed with enormous vigour, great loss of life. They tried for secrecy in there, but how to keep your preparations secret when the enemy is only 100 metres away from you? And in fact, the Australians in this attack, to their surprise, found out something that the Turks had done that they hadn't been able to perceive, and they'd logged in the top of their trenches. Not universally, but enough of it to create a real problem. So you had this issue of these Australians going through fire, arriving at the Turkish trenches, this is at Lone Pine, and discovering, oh, I can't get in there. So instead of basically whinging about it, the Aussies got on and got into the trench system, and then the most vicious hand-to-hand fighting occurs in the trenches. The Turks were brave, they were resolute, they were stubborn, they fought very hard. Turks don't call Lone Pine Lone Pine. That's our name for it. And it was called Lonesome Pine. That was shortened to Lone Pine. But it's, I've described it as being, I used that tennis simile before. Then the actual area was about the size of Rod Laver Arena, the centre court. It's not big. And today the monument, as you know, is not big. It's a very constrained piece of real estate. Yet in that real estate, 7 Australians over the several days of the action were eventually awarded the Victoria Cross. The Turks lost, and the number 7 recurs, but that's a low mark for what the Turks believe they lost, 7,000 soldiers dead. They call that place Bloody Ridge. Now, the further part to this is that through all of this, our troops were originally novices and now they're veterans. They've carried out attack after attack, trying in various ways to advance to the heights. If they get to the heights of Gallipoli Peninsula, they find that they can then perhaps, this is the theory, roll down the other side, capture that coast of the Gallipoli Peninsula in the Dardanelles and enable the Navy to do what they had proposed to do, steam up to Istanbul and knock it out of the war. Now, in all of that, getting to the high ground was the objective, and getting through the strong defences at Lone Pine was the way to do it. The Kiwis, those wonderful Kiwis, we sling off at our Kiwi mates, and they're still in the Constitution enabled to join us. And, you know, the snowball might survive in hell. But they are extraordinarily brave people, very much like us. And the Wellington Battalion on the 5th of August took the heights at Chunuk Bay and held them. They were decimated in in the doing so, but they actually owned the heights for a brief period. And they survived a lot of counterattacks and then were relieved by some British troops. And the Turks massed their forces and rolled them off the position. In all of this, we must pay due regard to Mustafa Kemal. Now, Mustafa Kemal is a colonel, but it's his regiment that has the prime responsibility for defence of the Gallipoli area, Anzac Cove area, we would call it. And he's known to have said something which I think is very notable. On day one, when Australians are piecemeal finding their way up the spur lines, and some young officer with a ragtag of soldiers from another unit is seen coming up, and the soldiers that were defending that spur line come back under a distinguished old non-commissioned officer, Turkish guy, and standing above him is Mustafa Kemal. And the sergeant major, Turkish sergeant major, says, Effendi, they're coming up, we are defeated. And he said, no, he said, but we've only got a little bit of ammunition. He said, we can't win. He says, you stay here. You don't have to win, but you have to die. So they stayed there, and of course, again, that was a key point. So we have then the Turks who are so brave and so resolute that they don't break and run. You have to dig them out. In all of this time, these wonderful soldiers have become veterans, but they've also become debilitated. They become worn down. They become subject to many abdominal type problems. They have lots of respiratory problems. You've got your people who have psychological breakdowns, and then there's the obvious battle injuries that people suffer. So they were being degraded. So I name to you, I use that word culminating point, that the relative failure of Lone Pine, victory there, but victory stopped from progressing, was indeed the culminating point of the whole campaign. After that, and after Wellington's battalion, the Wellington battalion were chucked off Chunuk Bair, or indeed their reinforcements were thrown off, you could say, let's start to get out of here. But what does that create for us? It creates for us a wonderful launching pad, if I could be cynical. The point I would make is that it's real. It's real. Those were different men. They created within their own organisation and transmitted to other Australian outfits that were raised and met them in Europe this sense that we were elite troops. The way I'm going to finish is upon us. You don't want to hear about the landing again. It was terrible. Okay. We found those elements of courage and perseverance, of mateship, camaraderie, perhaps a larrikin element, which properly harnessed is amazing. We find that's translated to all those other units that became, for us, a shining example of Australians leading in their generosity of spirit, their sense of service before self. Monash, a great man, the greatest general we've ever had, considered himself a failure at Gallipoli. And he thought of that because he was asked to make a flank probe come attack around the edge of the Lone Pine area and got lost. He and his brigade got lost. And he took that very hardly and became such a student, so focused, that he lost an enormous amount of weight. He studied his art, he worked so hard. And his idea was, He'd seen Gallipoli, he'd seen what had happened to troops poorly directed and poorly supported, and he wasn't going to have any of that when he was in command. So he becomes, out of that lesson, one of the greatest generals in World War I on the Allied side, and in Australia's history, the greatest general. Respected by his soldiers, not loved. He wasn't a charismatic individual. But when soldiers say, who's going to keep me alive? Monash will do the job. So with all of that, at the officer level, we found leaders. At the soldier level, our soldiers were without parallel. Ourselves and the Canadians were perhaps, at the end of the war, the best Allied forces in Europe. So I think this illuminates the Australian character to this degree. That translated, it basically was the shorthand that here in Australia could be used to describe national characteristics which were admirable in the extreme. And absent from that was, we didn't see ourselves as a fighting nation. We saw ourselves as a nation, a great nation, which would fight when necessary and display these qualities. So the sort of notions I've just described there in some length, they're not uniquely, peculiarly Australian. Lots of countries say that about their people, and they use the military history of their nation to support that. So they're not, proprietarily Australian, but they are profoundly, essentially, part of the Australian character. Because after all, those characteristics I've mentioned are those of quintessential Australians, the Anzacs. So perhaps when we're talking about Anzacs, Anzac Day, Lone Pine, the landings at Gallipoli, Long Tan, Teddy Sheehan, a fellow recently posthumously, belatedly awarded the VC, Dick Norden. Perhaps when we're talking about those sort of fellows, rather than celebrate Anzac Day, rather than celebrate Lone Pine, we remember them and we venerate them. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Sir Peter. That was terrific. I think if everyone would just, again, would give Sir Peter a round of applause. The message that I take away from your speech and the efforts of the others tonight is that the default position of the Australian is courage and bravery. And that's very important. And that's a quality that the Gallipoli Memorial Club need to preserve because it's easily lost. And we should never forget that that is what made Australia what it is today. I think it's a very important message. As part of that and how we move into the next chapter, we are supporting the Gallipoli Scholarship Fund, which is for the descendants of the Gallipoli veterans. And to talk about that, and hopefully we get closer over the next year or two, Adriana and Omar, as a real legacy that the Gallipoli Memorial Club can leave behind, with the museum and with the art prize and with all the other terrific things that we're doing. I think the Gallipoli Scholarship Foundation is something that we should all be very proud of. So if you wouldn't mind just spending a brief moment telling people what it is, and then I know you've got two students who are recipients, and I don't know if they're graduated or not, but they haven't, so they're shaking their head saying they need more money. Might have to pass the hat around in good Catholic tradition, Jared. You got a hat in that bag there. We'll pass the plate around to us. So Adriana, come up and just say a few brief words.
Each year, the Gallipoli Scholarship Fund provides educational opportunities for descendants of Australian veterans, in particular, those facing financial hardship, so they can grow into the future leaders and thinkers of this country. Our scholarship exists as a remembrance that sacrifice is best repaid by investing in the future that it secured. It's because of our generous donors we are able to provide the support that we do. And that's why I'd like to sincerely thank the Gallipoli Memorial Club for being a long-standing champion of our work. Your support has helped fund a scholar year after year, linking the past to the future generations. And this year, they have generously linked tonight's ticket sales to an opportunity for guests to make a donation to our fund. If you've already donated, thank you. It will make a real difference in students like Mitch and Ashley, two of our scholars here with us tonight, who will share their experience at attending Anzac Day at Gallipoli as a GSF scholar. They are living proof of the Anzac spirit, resilience, service, and commitment to country. Mitch's great-great-grandfather died in battle at Gallipoli, and his great-grandfather served in World War II. He is in his 5th year of law and arts dual degree, and inspired by the Anzac legend, he hopes to use his career to advocate for those less fortunate. Ashley is the proud daughter of 2 Army veterans. Her mom served in the peacekeeping mission in Rwanda, and her dad as a helicopter pilot in the Middle East. She is in her 3rd year of university, studying a dual degree in law and classical studies. She hopes to continue down a similar path as her parents by serving as a legal officer in the Air Force. These are the young people the GSF stands behind. And if you'd like to support and help more of our scholars, I'd love to chat with you. But now I'd like to introduce Mitch and Ash.
Good evening, everyone. So my name's Ash, and that's Mitch, if you couldn't tell. And we're Gallipoli Scholars in 2022 and 2021, respectively. And yes, we're still studying. Law is a long degree, so here we are. So Mitch and I were fortunate enough to travel to Turkey with the Department of Veteran Affairs to assist with the delivery of the 2025 Anzac Day service at Gallipoli. So for the Anzac Day service, we were part of the visitor services team. So from when the gates opened at 10:30 p.m. the night before, right through to the end of the service at 6 a.m, we were at the Anzac commemorative site helping visitors and ensuring that the day goes smoothly. We were also aided by students from the university in Chinakle, who helped with visitor experience and translating. It was amazing hearing the stories and experience of the university students from around the other side of the world, particularly over a nice warm cup of tea. It's very cold at the Gallipoli Peninsula, as we know, or chai, as they like to call it over there. Seeing the dawn service at Gallipoli is a bucket list item for many Australians and New Zealanders. And words cannot express how grateful we are to have been able not just to see the ceremony, but to help deliver this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to people. And when you see the thousands of people that have made the pilgrimage to the site, truly, we are reminded that the Anzac spirit is still strong within the Australian community. So from what was simply an acronym devised in training to group the Australian and New Zealand forces together soon became a word synonymous with being Australian. The Anzac spirit, the values of endurance, courage, ingenuity, good humour and mateship are now an integral part of the Australian identity. Importantly, these values were forged at the shores of Gallipoli and when Australian troops, at the shores of Gallipoli, and they were forged when the Australian troops landed at Gallipoli and were met with a relentless Ottoman attack. And they were forged during the battle of hand-to-hand combat at the Battle of Lone Pine. And despite all of this, it was forged because the Australians and New Zealanders, the Anzacs, continued to fight, show up and defend their country. And the Anzac spirit still permeates through our Defence Force today. We see it in those on deployment overseas, in the everyday work of service. I see it in my parents, 2 veterans of the Australian Army, both of whom have served overseas. And while I cannot begin to imagine what they've been through, my time at Gallipoli has made me feel that much closer to my parents and their service. And indeed, I'm looking forward to starting my own journey in the ADF with my sights set on being a lawyer in the RAF. So while at Gallipoli, we were also fortunate enough to have a battlefield tour of the peninsula with our incredible guide and local of the Çanakkale region, Bulant. We particularly enjoyed hearing about the Turkish perspective, and we learned all about Gallipoli. And so while we learn all about Gallipoli in school, we don't often hear about the other side of this solemn point in history. So Gallipoli, or Çanakkale Savaşı, as the Turks call it, is just as important in their national history as it is to us. So just as we have stories of heroism, such as Simpson and his donkey, so do the Turks. Similarly, however, we both share stories of loss. So while the Turkish defenders may have won the campaign in the end, they saw the death of over 85,000 Turkish soldiers. Indeed, there are no winners in war. And so going from battlefield to battlefield, cemetery to cemetery, the gravity of what this moment in time meant and continues to mean for Australians was felt incredibly deeply.
We were also very, very fortunate to be able to lay a wreath at the Lone Pine Cemetery, the commemoration event that occurs after the dawn service. But before that, we had our battlefields tour, and we stood at Lone Pine for the first time with our guide Bulant, and he described where the Australian and the Ottoman troops were in relation to each other, the closeness of it, the grit and determination of the Australians, and the brutality of the fighting. And this meant more to me knowing that behind me, on a plaque, was the name of my great-great-grandfather, who was killed in action on the Gallipoli Peninsula on the 2nd of May 1915. The second time we stood at Lone Pine was to lay a wreath during the commemoration service. We reflected on the Anzac spirit, the continuing significance of Anzac Day to ourselves and to Australia, and the role young people like Ash and I play in perpetuating understanding. And for me, it was especially significant, reflecting on what my great-great-grandfather must have been thinking and feeling while serving his country. And I think I can easily speak for both of us when I say it was a great honour of our lives and an opportunity we will forever be grateful for. And to take a step back and to reflect a little bit, I had never been overseas before. I had never been able to afford it. I'd worked every day I could since I was 14, and in my mind, I could never justify it. Never did I imagine that back in 2020, when I applied for a Gallipoli scholarship, that I would get to go overseas. Or, just taking a step back, I never thought I'd get a scholarship. But that scholarship afforded me the opportunity to go overseas on a trip of a lifetime. I never imagined that a scholarship would care so much about me, my journey, my results, who I was and how I was coping with transitioning to uni. I never thought I'd receive monthly phone calls to check in, to have a chat, invites to dinner, and I never thought I'd make friends for life, but here we are. The Gallipoli Scholarship Fund is sold short by its name. It's not just a scholarship, it's a community, it's a family, and it's a network, and it's enriched our lives in immeasurable ways. So we'd like to take a moment to thank the Gallipoli Scholarship Fund for providing us with this incredible opportunity, for making our steps into university and getting through what is now 5-year-long years of my degree. And we'd also like to thank the Gallipoli Memorial Club for their gracious and enduring support. Truly, our time in Turkey was unforgettable and completely life-changing. And it altered both of us in ways I didn't think we would realise, and maybe it would take me a while longer to articulate properly. We're immensely grateful for experiencing everything that we have, and immensely grateful for the support we received. Teşekkürler. Thank you.
Well, I think we've seen the future tonight. I'm immensely proud of that. And we've seen the future with these guys, Ollie, Jackson. We heard the history. We understand the grit and determination, but we just saw the future. So I think that's our journey, Sir Peter. We just witnessed it. Thank you all for coming. That is not the end of the night, I have to say. Being Irish but not Catholic, Gerard, we are not closing the bar for the time being. Otherwise, I'd be looking for that hat. I'd like to ask everybody to come back to the bar and have a drink, and I thank you all for your attendance. It's been a wonderful night. Thank you.